Okay, welcome everyone. For those of you who have just joined us, so we've been meeting today as a new research project, Non-Religion in a Complex Future. So some of us have been here for the day, and then a number of you have just joined us for the lecture, this, I guess, late afternoon, evening-ish. So welcome to the newcomers, those of you who haven't been here all day who've come to hear Graham Harvey speak. My name is Laurie Beeman. And among other things, I organize the Critical Thinkers in Religion, Law, and Social Theory, and this talk is part of that series, as well as piggybacking on the meeting of the Non-Religion in a Complex Future project. So I'm kind of doing double, triple duty here. I'm going to keep my introduction short. Graham will speak for somewhere around 45 minutes. He's very happy to take questions. In fact, he's already told me that's the best part of this for him. So we will be sure to make it worth his while and ask lots of really good questions. And then we have a reception at the end with lots of, we hope, good food. Fewer on the drink side of things, but lots of good food. So without further ado, Graham's lecture title today is Religion as Relations Within the Larger Than Human World. Graham Harvey is at the Open University. It's an hour outside of London, I think. Is that about right?
Fast train, half an hour.
Oh, okay. Half an hour fast train. London, England, not London, Ontario. So Graham is a professor in religious studies. His work focuses on animism, I think, but many, many other things too, rituals and protocols through which Indigenous and other communities engage with the larger than human world. He has many publications. I'm just going to mention a few. Food, Sex, and Strangers, Understanding Religion as Everyday Life, Animism, Respecting the Living World, and he's editor of a couple of book series, including the Routledge series, Vitality of Indigenous Religions. So without further ado, Graham, thank you so very much for coming and joining us for both the Non-Religion project, but also for offering this lecture today.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, yeah, it's a great honour. Thank you very much, Laurie and Doug and Heather and Vanessa for great organising, and especially for the invitation to me to be here. It's a great pleasure. I am acknowledging the authority and priority of local Indigenous people, Ottawa and other Anishinaabe, among whom I've learnt a lot about religion, about life, about the larger than human world. This is my first time in Ottawa, but I've spent time both in the Maritimes, in Newfoundland, among the Mi'kmaq, excuse me, and much further west and further south among Anishinaabe people in what's now Wisconsin, the United States. And in some ways, I want to talk a bit more about what I have learned and what I've been provoked to think. So the words there, looking back from elsewhere, in the book Food, Sex and Strangers, I use this trope of elsewhere because so often we scholars of religion have taken a European Protestant definition of religion as, quote, belief in God, and exported it elsewhere and looked for that in other communities. So what I do in Food, Sex and Strangers, and what to some extent I want to do today, is finding elsewheres where religion is understood, even if the word is a difficult one, in other ways. And then I come back to look again at the things that we, scholars of religion, often talk about, and want to look again. Looking back is a tricky phrase, because what I mean by that is not looking back at what we already know in the past, because in fact it's the future that is behind us. So think about this. The future is what you have seen. It's out there in front of you. You can visualize the future. The sorry, am I getting this the right way around? Sorry, I got that the wrong way around. The past, where we've been, is laid out in front of us. We know these things, we've seen this stuff. The future is creeping up behind us, and occasionally we get a glimpse of it coming up. So looking back from elsewhere is not looking into the past to try and understand what's gone on, but looking back to try and glimpse where we might go next. Okay, so that's one of those things that if you are an Indigenous person in many cultures, that's the way you understand where the future and the past are. So I've said this so many times, but still, as I just demonstrated, I confuse myself about where the future and the past are. So I still go in the past when I mean in the past, and the future is behind. So I'm labouring a point which is about how our bodies and our minds, which are the same, are trained to think about space and place and time and community. Our cultures, multiple cultures, teach us to be the people we are. And religion is like that. Religion is one of those things that we've been trained into thinking through. So looking back from elsewhere is an effort to break some of those habits. And I'm still struggling with it myself. So, okay, I should move on. So what I also want to talk about is rooted in my contribution to a larger multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary debate about animisms. These are a couple of the works in which I've engaged with others in trying to understand the ways of being in a multi-species world that understand that we are just one species of animate beings who live among and relate with other beings. So this animism is not the animism of Edward Tyler or the Oxford English Dictionary, which continues to insist that animism is the belief that everything, brackets, inanimate and animate, have life. Right, now that's a terrible definition because it already tells you that animists are wrong. If animists believe that their inanimate objects are alive, they're mad. I mean, you can't have inanimate animacy. So it's a very bad definition. So animacy is not Edward Tyler nor the Oxford English Dictionary, but the kind of thing that Irving Hallowell learned among the Anishinaabe of Berens River in Manitoba, especially in a conversation with an elder, Kiewicz, in which, for example, Hallowell asked this very European question, are all the rocks we see around us here alive? Because in Anishinaabe grammar, rocks are marked as grammatically animate living beings, just as in French tables are marked grammatically as feminine. Now I keep saying one day I should ask a French speaker, how do you treat tables as feminine beings? What difference does it make that they're feminine? And I have asked this and I got told that's a stupid English question. It's just grammar. But for the Anishinaabe, the point is that they are treated differently. Rocks and other animate beings are treated as persons with whom you might have a conversation, and much more importantly, to whom and from whom gifts can be exchanged. So this, the new animism, is, as on screen, a thoroughgoing relationality continuously negotiated through locally specific cultural etiquette in the larger than human world. So the conversation that ensued from this wonderful question and brilliant answer, no, but some are, which is wonderfully enigmatic and humorous and all sorts of other things, provocative. Are all the rocks we see around us here? No, but some are. The conversation that ensues is all about, it's the wrong question. It's not life or death. It's not a category question that should be asked. The question that should be asked is, how do you appropriately engage with other beings around you? So for the Anishinaabe and many other Indigenous and not only Indigenous people, the assumption made is that all around us are animate beings, rather than inanimate mere scenery or resources that we can draw on without any asking of permission or giving thanks or expressions of sorrow or regret or the other possibilities. If the assumption is that you are continuously encountering persons, then sometimes at least you need to stop and say hello and find the right way to engage, the right kind of gift to open a conversation. Not always, because after all, we all in this room, I suspect, believe in human rights, but we don't stop and speak to everybody on the street to say how wonderful they are as a human being with rights. And we just get on with it. But sometimes we meet somebody and we shake their hand, we kiss them, more or less intimately, depending on how well we know them, and so on. So the same thing in this animate world. Okay, so this is kind of where I'm coming from, where I've kind of think I've got an understanding of the world, learned among a host of indigenous people and others around the world. I wasn't introduced to all these people, but they include Anishinaabe children on a Wisconsin reservation, learning Anishinaabe-Moan, learning about grammar by colouring in pictures, Aboriginal culture teacher in Alice Springs, the Orishas in the home of a priestess in Shogbo in Nigeria, and others. So importantly, the people on screen here include object persons and divinity beings. So this is a buffalo robe and the other accoutrements, object persons of a Catholic church in the Twin Cities. They're not just objects that you manipulate in the ceremony. They are persons, they are beings who engage, with whom the ceremony cannot take place. They are persons who have responsibilities, rights, interests, and so on. Many years ago, this special issue of the journal Religion was published, which includes articles about the Ottawa, La Lakota, and other Indigenous people in North America, trying to understand the relationality of those people and their ceremonial practices and everyday life practices. And the struggle here is that many of those people, many of those nations, don't have a word for religion, and often will say, we don't have religion, we don't do religion. There's no separate bit of our lives which is religion, different to other things. So this was one attempt to find a place where scholars of religion could find some way of engaging with the protocols, the ideas and relations that empower and animate ritual and everyday life in Indigenous people's engagement with the larger than human world. This has been something that's inspired me a lot in my career, looking at all kinds of other religious practice elsewhere. And perhaps is one way in which the debate that some of us have been having today about religion, not religion, non-religion, since, as somebody in the room earlier said, Indigenous people, first of all, were accused of not having religion, the big effort in the colonisation invasion period to find religion among the people in the Caribbean, in the Americas, and they didn't have anything like it, therefore could be subjected to slavery, genocide, and all sorts of other things because they didn't have something recognisably like religion. And then when that narrative continues so that people say, well, we don't have religion but for a different reason, because we don't separate it out, you get that the notion of religion has kind of evolved. Sorry, this is... I think I'm throwing hints of a whole dozen different lectures at you, but these are kind of ways in which I want to think about how we understand what is religion, what isn't religion, and not to insist that people who say we don't have religion, we don't do religion, I don't want to insist that they do. I want to say that as a scholar of religion, I recognise some of the things that happen among those people, some of those things that are normative, everyday, relational practices, are religion, and provoke me to come back to what I think I knew earlier, or what I'm more familiar with in my home environment, a village in England where the dominant religion, which is still a small minority in the village, which is the Anglican church up the road, the way they think about what religion might be. Because I don't think that they think religion is just belief in God in that Oxford English Dictionary constrained version. I think that they also think it's about relationships, and I think that person, power and gift might be valuable ways to interrogate some things they get up to. So, another part of the context for my thinking here is Bruno Latour's assertion that we have never been modern. Because modernity isn't a name for a period of time, it's a project that attempts to separate out parts of the larger cosmos in which we live and move and have our being. Strangely religious phrase. So modernity is a purification, a purity system, like those that we find among Jews and many other peoples, in which things are separated. So not here meat and milk, but here nature and culture. So although we have never been modern, according to Latour, because we've never really actually lived this way, we've kept trying. And when I say we now, I mean especially we academics, because we keep reifying nature-culture distinctions by digging deeper into the silos of the natural sciences and the social sciences. So Latour again has famously insisted that we should stop talking about society when all we mean is humans, because our societies, our acts of socializing or our assembling of beings are always with other than human beings, perhaps not his language. So in this room, there are more non-human beings than there are human beings. So I don't only mean there are computers, because there aren't that many of those, there may be as many computers as there are human, but there are far more bacteria than there are humans. And even within our, what I'm pleased to call myself, there is more non-human bacterial DNA than human DNA, were you to take me apart and work it all out. So we can get away from this modern separation between culture and nature very simply, not by going out into the wilderness, but by engaging straightforwardly with the multiple beings with whom we live, who live on us and around us. Oops, let's not lose sight of my words. So if you want to do this as a nice, whether you call this a spiritual practice or a relational practice, if you like to roll up your sleeves and caress your inner elbow, you will then be communing with 5 or 6 tribes of bacteria who prefer, and 1 or 2 of you are actually doing it, which is wonderful. The rest of you go, what the hell is he talking about? Right, so in your elbow group, there are 5 or 6 tribes of bacteria whose preferred real estate for many millennia is just there, right? Let alone all those other good bacteria who live in your guts, who eat the stuff that otherwise you couldn't absorb. You are a multi-species community. You're already beyond individuality. Sorry, that's Latour. We kept on trying. We have continued to to push this construction of modernity. The picture there is one moment of that construction. One or two of you, I think, recognising this is the signing of the one stage of the Peace of Westphalia. So the Westphalian constitution of nation states, under which most of us, if not probably all of us, now live. And if you don't, your politicians are probably trying to make the Westphalian system work for you. Part of the constitution of Westphalian states is, in the early days, the religion of the prince is the religion of the state, of the principality, of the area. You had to be a Catholic in a Catholic state, a Protestant in a Protestant state. If you were something else, just keep it hidden. You could do Protestant stuff in a Catholic state if you kept it quiet and didn't do it too publicly. But basically, the end result of this constitution of religion as a private matter which is different to the doing of politics, the doing of citizenship, is secularization and non-religion. We end up with religion is a hobby, that's something that people do on, pick your day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whichever, or those odd annual occasions in which you get together in some big ceremony. Religion is something which doesn't affect your voting or your paying of taxes. You pay your taxes, you do your voting, regardless of whether you are a member of any particular religious community, because the Treaty of Westphalia required that. This was not the end of the wars of religion. This was a stage at the end, towards the end, of the wars of nation building. So the nation states were creating this process and required religion to be privatized, and we've carried on with that process to the point that religion is almost an irrelevancy. If it's irrelevant in politics and other massively important parts of our lives, then what role does it have in the rest of our lives? It becomes a private hobby, or in the title of that wonderful book from, I don't know when it was published, Licensed Insanities. So religion has become that kind of thing. I mean, I'm putting that out as a provocation. But we've never been modern. We've carried on living with probiotic bacteria in our guts. We're encouraged to restore that community of living beings within us. We've refused that human separation in our everyday reality. Ideologically, we may want to separate humans out from everybody else, but in practice, we're continuously engaging with bacteria. Many of you have a favourite tree, or rock, or river, or beach, or mountain. There's a place that you engage with which is not rational, modern. It's a relational engagement with another being. And you've had strange experiences, probably, but you may not speak about in academic context, but we should, perhaps. And of course, many of us not only live with privilege, we're allowed to live with cats. They train us to live in particular ways. They train us to open doors for them and so on. They're not like dogs who will just do what they're told because they know that we're the dominant big dogs, but cats are the dominant wise species in our homes for many of us. Sorry. So, it's the cat with whom I live. And some of the other strange beings who are object persons, perhaps. My childhood panda. So, we all do this stuff, which is not modern. We've never really broken the habit of not being modern. In some senses, we're all animists. We're all people who not only have relationships, because if you didn't have relationships with bacteria, you would be dead. So not only is it, a necessary part of your ontology, your being, that you have relationships with other beings, you like it. And in many ways, you find ways to increase those relationships, to improve those relationships. So in all these ways, we've been kind of animists. And we could have learned this from Darwin, this I think, his first sketch in his notepad of his notion of the tree of life, the interconnection between the kinship between all living beings in this planet and perhaps beyond. You could learn it from Anishinaabe children. You could learn it from the elbow bacteria, nicely coloured in there. They're the elbow bacteria. So there are lots of other ways we could have learned. Or you could learn it from contemporary. So having said that there's this weird separation between natural sciences and social sciences, here we have a scholar of science looking at how we engage with animals. Now, when I went to look for the picture of this cover, so I could show you it, this wonderful book called What Would Animals Say If We Asked the Right Questions? As I typed, what would animals say if, I got the computer came back with if they could talk. I went, no, I was not going to ask for a book called What Would Animals Say If They Could Talk, because I know they talk. My cat is very eloquent about whether she's going to eat that or this, and so on, and you on. Right, so this was a great book, and I put the chapter titles there because I think you should see how wonderful some of how provocative they are. This is solid ethology, people studying among both laboratory animals and animals in the so-called wild. There's a wonderful chapter there called something like, where is it? Is it all right to urinate in front of animals? Right. So great science. How do you do research among animals if you stop assuming that they are just interested in food and sex, which is, after all, what most animal documentaries show us. It's still David Attenborough's latest thing. He's still doing that, despite the fact that he's got beyond it in earlier series, but he's fallen back into this. That's all animal stuff do. It's either hunting or breeding. You go, no, come on, look. So if you want to know what chimpanzees are up to, you need to be reasonably happy to pee in the forest. Otherwise, the chimpanzees, as the scholar that's being written about in that chapter discovered, the chimpanzees will treat you as some sort of weird big thing that isn't like anything like them. But once this scholar of chimpanzees, panthropologist, actually got caught short and peed in the forest, suddenly the chimpanzees treated her differently, suddenly treated her as a normal kind of living being. So all sorts of things became possible in that research once she stopped the project of human separatism, which is what many of us are still engaged in. Okay, so at this point I could look around to other scholars who've tried to engage differently with the larger than human world. We could talk about Isabel Stenger's talking about cosmopolitics, Fiberasto Castro talking about multinaturalism. We could talk about Donna Haraway staying with trouble. We could talk about with Povinelli about geontologies, so geology rather than bios, life, as if the minerals that we live as and among are somehow different. So these are quite provocative, different ways of thinking through and in the world. We could engage with Marilyn Stratton, provocatively suggesting that that for the Melanesians the project is to encourage people to be dividuals, whereas the modern project is to encourage us to be individuals. So this is, for those of you waiting for this moment, the Monty Python moment. This is where I say, you're all dividuals. Someone's going to say, so thank you. Someone's going to say, we're not. It's all right. So you need to play. That was The Life of Brian, where Brian comes out and says, you don't need a leader. You're all individuals. And this guy goes, I'm not. Which was a brilliant moment, right? So turn it around, and the Dividual project is about how do we encourage relationality and we discover ourselves to be different kinds of beings. So at this moment, I'm somebody who, perhaps I'm lecturing, perhaps I'm ranting, I don't know, but that's kind of my relationship with you. Some of you responding differently, but I'm a different kind of being, different kind of person. I'm a person you already know who is obsessed by cats. I'm controlled by a cat sometimes. I'm a husband. So these are all parts of my dividuality, my multiple relations, and I'm a different being in those different relationships. I don't rant to my cat. I know that wouldn't work. I don't often rant to my wife because I know what happens then, right? So sometimes, I confess. God, this is being recorded, so she might see it sometime. So anyway, that's dividuality. Val Plumwood, if you want a really good article about what it's really like to be a human in a multi-species world, you need to read her article, Being Prey. If you think that humans are at the top of any evolutionary cycle, any evolutionary, what's it called, pyramid of life, discover that crocodiles like eating us, and crocodiles police bad behaviour in a multi-species world. And Val Plum would discover that when crocodiles attempted to eat her, and she survived to write this wonderful piece, Being Prey. Debbie Bird-Rose on the wild, on the shimmering. These are people who've learned again among Indigenous people. Karen Barad on space-time mattering and agential realism. This is the nature of the world and the cosmos at subatomic level. Anna Singh and company in the book Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet. Lynn Margulis talking about symbiogenesis. So, okay, I'm a scholar of religion. Sometimes we scholars of religion talk about syncretism, and we should stop, because syncretism does not need explaining. Syncretism is the norm. What needs explaining is when people only do one thing. So symbiogenesis is like that. There is no evolution which is not symbiogenesis. We evolve because of other species. We become human because bacteria make us what we are. Even when we're born, the moment we come through the birth canal, new bacteria get to us and carry on the process of making us physically, let alone emotionally, psychologically, and all those other weird bits of us. Okay, but we could also learn this from quote, ordinary people. In this case, an indigenous Sami guy who I met at the Riddu Riddu Festival in Sapmi in Arctic Norway, in this wonderful place. Festival happens every July in the Arctic summer, and I was standing by this river in about the fourth year I'd been, and I was going, this is very beautiful. And this guy said to me, "Yeah, well, it is, but there are salmon and the trout are out in the field and they cannot get up the river because of global warming. The snow on those mountains is melting so fast, the river's higher and colder than it should be. And if it doesn't calm down and warm up very soon, the salmon will not get into the river to spawn, and then there will be no salmon." Now, as we carried on talking, became very clear to me, although he could have been talking about coastal Sami fishing and subsistence, he wasn't. He was concerned for the fish community, for the river community, the larger than human community there. So his concern was that we humans have disrupted the world so much that the salmon and river community are deeply damaged by ordinary process of modernity, our human separatist movement that's ignored the reality. So I've been trying to think about how religion works in that context, and I go back to an experience I had in Newfoundland at Miapukek, the Con River Reserve in which, at the end of the very first traditional powwow that they hosted there as part of their reclamation of sovereignty and well-being in the community, one of the eagles that lived across the river from this spot, the powwow ground, flew across the river, flew a perfect circle above the drum group during the last honour song, when the elders and the veterans were dancing around the last drum round. This eagle came round, and that was amazing to me, because I don't see eagles very often. But for them, they see eagles all the time. But that eagle was behaving in a strange way, and people spontaneously, not just people who knew I was a researcher interested in strange things, but people came and said all kinds of wonderful things, including that. They stopped immediately and went, "Kitpu, eagle," and then they started saying to me, "Well, did you see that? Did you see the eagle? What it did? That was the eagle saying, 'It's about time you lot got back and joined in the ceremonies. We've kept the tradition going while you lot did other things. Now you've started joining in again.'" So religion for them was very clearly not just a human practice, human ceremonial, but something that the multi-species local community would do. So, and the eagles have carried on communicating with people there about other stuff. Not only strange ceremonials, but also about the availability of salmon and whether the farmed salmon are a good thing out in the Bay d'Espoir or not, and so on. So there's lots of great stuff to be thought about in terms of what the eagles have said. Here's another river. This is a river flowing from Mount Ruapehu in the centre of North Island, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Many of you have seen either this mountain, Ruapehu, or the neighbouring mountain because you've seen the film Lord of the Rings. So the neighbouring mountain plays the role of Mordor, right, Mount Doom. So this mountain is the snowy mountain just to the south, who plays a very different role in the film. But this is one of the streams that flows off Ruapehu, and I happened to be there coincidentally, serendipitously, when the local Maori iwi community were signing an agreement with one of the electricity generating companies, Genesis Electricity, to release the water from 4 of the streams from the mountain so it could flow from the mountain to the sea. And this was one of them. So when we went up the mountain after some of the signing stuff, what happened then, I think baffled some of the folk from Genesis Electricity. They were fine with honouring Maori cultural practice. They'd even learnt enough Maori to make speeches in this process, but the local Ngāti community, before doing the human-to-human signing, they all got in the river and they all did stuff that communicated with the river. Their thing was about, this is a 3-way process. This river now will flow, or at least parts of it will flow from the mountain to the sea, and all kinds of the river as community has rights and responsibilities. So in New Zealand law, you may have seen that Whanganui River now has legal personhood, like some corporate entities. So legally, the river is recognised as a person, and therefore has some protections under law, has rights. But the language of rights isn't enough in many Indigenous contexts. They also want the language of responsibility. So the river also is responsible for giving itself to the fish, the plants, to the humans and others. So I'm going to whiz on because time is short. So, at the Riri Festival, as well as the river problem, the Riri Festival is this great event with Indigenous performers from all around the world. So there was a moment in the festival, so I'm going more explicitly perhaps back to religious practice, the Mana and the Tribe. Mana is the lead singer of the band called Mana and the Tribe. When she began her set, she said, "From our mountains to your mountains, from our rivers to your rivers," and it wasn't only an expression of Indigenous belonging to place. It was about humans as more mobile diplomats, bringing greetings from one living being, mountain, river, to other mountains, river, persons. So there's this diplomacy in this larger than human world that, again, I'm seeking to find how, if I was a scholar of politics, I would insist that this is a political act. So I've just been writing about how democracy has changed by understanding this as a multi-species democratic intervention. But religion. So religion. One of the first things that I read, one of the first academic articles I read about Indigenous religion, there's a wonderful article by the late Te Pakaka Tawhai, a Maori scholar, who I quote quite a lot. And Pakatawhai says, among my people, the purpose of religious activity is doing violence with impunity. Okay? The purpose of religious activity is doing violence with impunity. So most communities, I was going to say most human communities, but I think this might be true of many other species, we have rules about it's not okay to kill, but also we need to feed our guests. We need to shelter our guests. So Tawhai uses the example of the totara tree, who you go into the forest and you cut down to build a shelter. And you build a shelter like the meeting house, in this case Hinimihi, who, note the pronoun, is an ancestor of the Maori community Ngāti Hinimihi, but also welcomes visitors from Ngāti Ranana, the London Maori community, and other visitors. So in this kind of construction, house person, the tree becomes a person, a different kind of person. Okay, the tree's been chopped down with careful ceremony, purpose of religious activity, doing violence with impunity. Go into the forest, and I have to say or do something that says, I recognise I have no right to kill you, but I need to because I'm sorry, I won't kill all the trees, I limit myself. Is it okay? I wait for some sort of sign. I do this incredible act of violence, and if I've done it right, I don't suffer the penalty. I go on to carve the tree into the meeting house, where the tree does a similar job. The tree in the forest separates Mother Earth and Father Sky, who would otherwise, in Maori cosmology, be locked in sexual embrace, and there's not much room between them for other beings, their children, to move around. So the tree, as Tane Mahuta, separates Father Sky from Mother Earth, and continues to do that. In the meeting house, as carved pillar and walls and roof, Tane tree wood separates the roof from the floor to still enable the diversification of life and possibilities, the debate between different beings, the negotiation of rights and responsibilities, the solving of relational problems, and so on. Sorry, I won't go on for too long on this. So religion is, in this context, not only about politics and diplomacy, but also about the ways in which we recognise, express, and deal with the dangers of living in a multi-species world. I could have used a lot of other examples, like Inuit conversation, a conversation with Rasmussen, in which our Inuit shaman, Angkor said, sorry, that's a Greenlandic word, said the danger of living is that we have to eat souls, we have to eat living beings. How do we do that? So religion is this interesting process. So if, to return to the title as I end, trying to find what religion might be in this multi-species world rather than in this human separatist world that modernity has encourages us to think about us in the academy and so on, then these are some ways in which, inspired by some Indigenous people, we might find ways, provocative ways of rethinking how religion might operate, in which it becomes sensible to ask questions, as Doug said earlier, what do wombats want, what do hedgehogs desire, what do mountains want, what do rivers require, what do bacteria desire, how do we communicate with them, what do we need if trees are beings who have families and rights and relationships that we endanger by our everyday ordinary practice of trying to be modern. If we were to try instead to be multi-species relations as we actually are, then we need to think differently about what religion might be. Thank you for listening. I now invite your provocative responses and challenges, as well as interesting questions. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Would you like to tend your own questions, or would you like me to monitor?
I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Thanks so much for the talk. I've always appreciated your work in being in religious studies departments where, you know, it's sort of a world religions paradigm, and you need to sort of break out of that. And I see students, their eyes often, you know, open up when being exposed to indigenous religious traditions because it's such a different frame of reference from what they're used to. And your work has been a part of that for me. In the context of today, we had a full day on, you know, non-religion.
Yeah.
Right, and so that we said that might focus on belief, or it might focus on practice.
Yeah.
Might have different sort of foci. So, in indigenous context, how might one conceptualize non-religion based on your understanding of religion? I think of Jack Goody's article called "A Kernel of Doubt" from the mid-90s, which said that it's sometimes the case that Western scholars will portray indigenous or other societies as somehow universally have a sort of universal piety, that everyone sort of goes along with these traditions in the same way, and it's not contested. You don't have individuals doubting that that particular rock is not conscious when that stuff very well might be there.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, in your experience, what are the similarities and differences in sort of doubt and resistance to those ideas in indigenous contexts?
Okay, thanks. So I do need to acknowledge that that many of the people that I've spoken about, as well as being indigenous, are often, some of them are, quote, traditionalists of various kinds. Some of them, as I did want to make sure that Catholic Church was represented there. Tafai was a Baha'i. So indigenous knowledges and practices are not in a box, and in the same way as you imply, world religions keep putting things in boxes, and so I want to break out of that but I do want to be very clear that in a sketchy version like this, I can't do justice to all the diversity. But to come back to your question, okay, so doubt might not be the primary, because it's an obvious opposition to belief. So doubt might not be exactly the first thing. Reluctance to join in might be the opposition to the more relational doing ceremony. So, but yeah, there are plenty of indigenous people who either want to move on from tradition and from religion of any kind, any of these other religions that have come in, and want to be non-religious like everybody else. There are other people who insist, well, actually none of us do religion because, actually Tafai's article begins with, if you ask Maori on the street of Ruatoria, a remote Maori village, unless you're a Rastafarian. What is religion? They'll say, well, we don't do that because religion to them now means what white folk do on Sunday, or hypocrisy because they do this thing on Sunday and they don't live it. So we don't do that. We do the ceremony. So I kind of struggle with a bit about doubt, because it's not really that important. Just as you don't find Indigenous people, traditionalists at least, saying, do you really believe that these rocks are persons? That people don't get asked, do you believe this, that, or the other? You're kind of encouraged to join in, to offer gifts. If you can ask an elder a question, you bring them tobacco, kinnikinnick, or give them some beer or whatever in those local contexts. Yeah, sorry, I'm going round in circles and not really answering your question, I realise. End of the long day. So not joining in is entirely possible, and many of these things. So animism. Right. Let me just finish with this bit. So the kids that I showed you a picture of, now grown-ups, were being taught about grammar, and in that community, there's a whole lot of writing about animism that suggests that children are naturally animistic. This is all Piaget and stuff, and then children learn not to be animistic. But in most Indigenous communities, which I think are appropriately called animists, you learn throughout life. So the elders are usually more animistic, and doubt before that is entirely possible. Not everybody said, oh, well, the eagle said this. So we go, oh, it's just an eagle. So I don't know that doubt is a problem. It's not really the defining generative category in the way that it would be if belief was the big thing. But then I don't know that it's a big defining organising category in most of the things that we do call religion. So Reformed Jews are quite Protestant and do think about beliefs. There's the Young Men's Buddhist Association set up in Sri Lanka in the 19th century that defined Buddhism in a very creedal way, but that was just colonialism. So most people in the world don't define religion around belief, and therefore doubt isn't exactly the same problem. Not joining in is a thing you slowly do, or you move away. So I could probably answer that better when I think about it properly, and maybe later.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thanks.
You didn't use the word spirit or mention spirits.
Mm-hmm.
So I really want to ask you how spirits fit into
Okay.
an animist view.
Right.
And that relates to a sort of a bit bigger question. Would you argue that animism is one very, very specific, subspecies, or are you saying that actually animism is quite widespread? So,
Right.
kind of animism as you described it,
Yeah.
very much tied up with just Middle Earth, if you like, and material objects and nature.
Okay.
So, a lot of religions of all sorts, not just the world religions, there's a lower earth, there's the gods, the beings, the elves, the
Yeah.
whatever of the lower earth, and then there are
Right.
the gods of the air and the higher spirits, and there are evil
Okay.
spirits as well, and none of them came into your talk.
No.
So, how does animism sit in the bigger
Okay.
picture of these spirit worlds kind of thing?
Okay. I struggle with the word spirit because it's a bit like the word animal, and yet we often think of it as being specific kinds of beings. So it's such a large category. So you just illustrate that by saying there are elves and you named a number of other beings who might be considered to be spirits and deities. They're all spirits. They're so different that it's a kind of, to me, a useless word, because so many people think that religion is about spiritual beings, and the only thing that they have in common is you don't see them very often. But for many, so I put that picture of the Orishas in Oshogbo up because the Orishas, the deities there, are entirely observable, touchable. They eat, they drink. The Israelite deity smelt the sacrifice. These are not spiritual in the sense of disembodied beings. So I struggle with the language because it carries too many assumptions of non-physicality, which it may not be what you're asking, but for many people it does import that kind of transcendence from the physical. So the distinction is between physical, this world, and allegedly above transcendent spiritual reality. Whereas I think that for many people, including many Christians, the reality of the world, the deities, the saints and so on, are quite tactile. You can kiss the icon and then you are engaging with the saint, maybe one step removed, but it's not totally unphysical. So that said, I recognise that many people talking about, writing about, speaking about, living out some version of animism engage with beings that we don't see very often. So I'd be very happy to tell stories about my own experience in communities where strange things happen that require me to say that the best explanation for this is that invisible beings, spirits, the elves, the fairies, on a good day did something. I once was, one quick story out of many, dangerous territory. I was once collecting firewood for a festival, pagan festival, and I in a wood that I know very well, I went to the spring because I couldn't find enough wood for all the people who are going to come there, and I said, you know me, I know you, doing this thing, need some firewood. And all I really meant was, like many other people, can I get a bit of help? I'm going to walk back into the woods and I'd like to find it. I wasn't expecting big miracles. I turned around and I nearly fell over a pile of logs about this high. And I'm, of course, a totally rational, secular kind of being. And yet, something weird happened. And I had no other explanation for it than somebody put some wood there. I don't know. So I am rational enough to know that that people from every religion, and none, have had weird experiences. Can only be explained by my God's the only true God, or my relationship is better than your relationship, and therefore my prayer was answered. And you go, it baffles me what happened there, but strange things happen. So yeah, I am on a day when I'm too tired to resist the temptation to tell you my own experiences, will tell you that yes, there are these beings who I might call something that spirit might be a translation for. And many Indigenous people also talk about spirit, but that's a translation term and often don't mean that same transcendence. So that issue of the journal Religion, Ken Morrison was the centre of that whole piece, was seeking a non-supernatural theory of grace, and more horizontal, because the deities, the ancestors, also evolve within this planet. So even that language of the lower world and the above world, they're not alien realms in many of these indigenous contexts. They might be elsewhere. I'm not saying that they couldn't be that, but for some of the people I'm engaging with, that notion of transcendence imports a twist that isn't really what they're up to. So again, that's kind of edging towards my answer, but not all the way. So it's a kind of struggle with the word spirit, but because, so you used the phrase earlier, other than human person, which comes out of Irving Hallowell's attempt to translate from Ojibwe and Anishinaabe, and it's a useful phrase because in European languages, often in English certainly, the word person is automatically translated as human, and usually even as white men, right? There are persons and their wives. So the other than human person phrase is only necessary when you make that ontological assumption. If you think that bears are persons, then you can just say bear. But until then, I need to say other than human persons, bear persons, or I could say other than bear persons, because I suspect that bears might also sometimes think bears are more important than others. So that language, and then the language, but the problem is when I say that, when I quote Irving Hallowell, a number of times I hear myself allegedly being quoted as meaning spirits when I say other than human persons, and I don't mean that, because I do mean trees and badgers and hedgehogs and wombats and other beings, as well as deities and the elves and other tricky beings. They're all ancestors, all those other beings. So that's part of the problem of the translation of these things, which are easier to say in Ojibwe Moen or in Te Reo Maori or other more indigenous, more animistic languages. So this effort to shift is part of the struggle with modernity, and part of the struggle with modernity is that we keep using the word nature to mean the rest of the world. There is no place that's nature. I mean, if elbow bacteria and stomach bacteria are alien beings, well, I'm sorry, but that whole notion of the wild is a crazy one. We need to stop separating society as just a human thing. We need to stop this human separatist movement. Sorry, I know I am definitely ranting now. There's another question. Let's move on. Oh, sorry.
I forgot something. I was so engrossed, and I was supposed to tell you to please go to the microphone to ask a question, because we're recording this, and absent intervention of the spirit, this will not be recorded. So please, if you have a question, go to the microphone and ask it.
I thought there was a question further back before I come to you, but I thought maybe it's gone. No? Okay, I thought I saw a hand further back, so please.
Thank you, Graham. It was very interesting. My question has to be framed in the light of what many of us in this room have been doing all day. Right? And you said at the beginning that what you have presented under the title of Animism, that many of the people who perform this would not associate the word religion with it. Okay. But you, for your own purposes, do that anyways. Right? Could you not also, or I ask you, could we all just as easily also say it's non-religion?
Yes. So we could agree with the Oxford English Dictionary that religion is belief in God. We could agree with them that it's a human thing to do, and so on. And then we have some very specific things to do, and that's fine. I mean, the people I'm engaging with, also some of them very clearly don't like the word animism. So Jacob Olapuna, professor of religion at Harvard, apparently for 20 years we've been having an argument, I hadn't realised it had gone on that long, in which he's told me that I should stop talking about animism because it's a colonial term that keeps being used derogatorily, is that right? As a derogative against people in West Africa in particular. And I keep saying, well, okay, the word gay has been used as a derogatory term too, and people have reclaimed it, and we're trying here, because of Anishinaabe grammatical terms, and maybe not the right term. So there are all kinds of strategic things we could do. And for me, it is very much about a strategy. So we had these things called world religions, 5, 6, or 7, or whatever it is, that people try to get in on. So the Baha'is try to join, right? Because they've got similar things. They represent themselves as having a transcendent being an ultimate reality, a text, and all those kind of things that you need, a founder. And then, there's a bit of a problem because some of them don't have a deity, some of them don't have a founder, and they still try to insist on being part of the club, some more successfully than others. Then we, some of the people in this room, extended that reality of the study of religions by having this category called new religions, some of which are as old as the other world religions. They're just a newer social version. So ISKCON, for example, is a new social version of a new organisation of Hinduism, but it's not a new religion. So we've got those categories, and then we scholars of religion, left the indigenous stuff to anthropologists who weren't very good at it. Some of them were. There were some interesting conversations that went on. And I and others who just had this privilege of accidentally getting to hang out with some amazing people in reserves, reservations, indigenous communities. So you start thinking, well, okay, if this is religion, is the stuff I'm seeing here, this ceremonial practice, is there some way in which it is religion and I can take back what I learn and think again about what happens among those other groups, and I can carry on the breaking open of those categories, world religions, new religions, and so on. So we end up with just religions in the end, but until we get there, we need these interventions that say indigenous religions. And animism is just one part of that, because the language of different kinds of theism, monotheism, polytheism, and so on, atheism. So these ways of defining religion around the number or nature of deities. And then there's sort of ancestor veneration and so on. These other categories. And I and many others in multiple disciplines started thinking about the category of animism and how it might be reclaimed. And that was mostly anthropologists starting that process. So yes, the short answer is yes, we could insist that this stuff isn't religion, that these people do not non-religion. What they do is diplomacy in the larger than human world. It's politics. It's all those other categories that we create other disciplines to study. We could leave it to politicians, but I don't know of any politicians or political scientists, I'm sure there must be some, involved in this process of rethinking democracy in this larger than human world. Well, actually I did cite some of those people trying to make those interventions, informed by Amazonianists and others, thinking, okay, how does diplomacy work? And Latour has picked up on that stuff as well. So yeah, we could leave it to those other people, or we could study as this project is. This is not religion, non-religion, in the sense that some of those people, because clearly, as some of you illustrated, for some people who tick the box on the census that says no religion or none, I have no religion, what they mean is they don't affiliate. So for these people, well, there's nothing to affiliate to. You're brought up in a practice. You're encouraged to maybe later in life join in a particular ceremonial complex, but that's not religion in the same sense of some of those bigger institutional things. So maybe it's a crisis of institutional religiosity rather than religion. So those are kind of feelings towards that kind of, is there a way of thinking of this as religion, not religion, non-religion? So it's a political intervention, it's a strategy rather than another box that I want to put it all in. And I could be entirely wrong. So I can't have not provoked all of you. There must be other people provoked by some of this. So,
Maybe they're ready for it.
maybe. There's one hand here, tentatively. Do you want to?
You mind get around the microphone?
Oh, right, yes.
There's only the long way.
Graham knows me well, Shelley Rabinovich, and I'm a sessional lecturer in religious studies here at the U of O. A lot of my work, in a lot of what's overlapping with yours, was done when Dr. Marie-Françoise Guidon was still teaching here. She was my doctoral advisor. And I think we're tripping up so badly on linguistic definitions, which are all head knowledge. It is, and I have said this to other people because it's probably the single biggest realization I had as I increasingly was invited by Indigenous people to be involved in ceremony. And that's the word we use, is ceremony. It's not religion. It's, practice. You just trip in the English language on this. But while doing workshops with her 20 years ago, perhaps a little more, it's before her husband took ill, she was trying to see if humans could make nonverbal intelligence to intelligence contact with things that we would categorize as non-human, and therefore at some level not sentient at the level that we are sentient at, or with the complexity. And I was in a number, I worked probably for a couple of years with her on this stuff before her husband took ill. And when I started to become aware during one of these workshops that I was making some kind of contact with the jasmine plant that I was sitting in front of, because we were told to, in her explanation of what she'd been taught by the Tsimshian and by the Dene, two groups she worked extensively with, was that you need to flatter and say wonderful things about whoever, and I'm going to use that word, you're trying to make contact with. Yeah. And when I began to smell jasmine, I immediately snapped back, and I remember this within my own head, into the logic brain going, this can't be, this is ridiculous. And I had to literally say to myself, in for a penny, in for a pound. Either you're going to suspend the rational, logical analysis brain and either experience this in its entirety wherever it goes, because you've been working on this for a long time, or you're not.
Yeah.
And I keep saying to students that you cannot analyze at the same time as you experience, because and I maintain it's two different areas of the brain that are working. I try and understand this from a neurological point of view, because it's the only way you can explain it to people that haven't done this. Are we drowning ourselves by trying to come up with academic terms for things that need to be experienced before we start trying to analyze it? That would be my question from that.
Right. Thank you, Miigwech. Okay. So somewhere in there should have been a slide with Robin Wall Kimmerer and Kyle White talking about research methods engaging with plant and animal communities. So I did put up a zoologist, the Desprez, what would animals say if we asked the right questions? And that question is being asked by people about plants as well. So how would we do this? So it is bizarre, as I think I said to somebody else earlier, that there's still a lot of people trying to get laboratory animals to learn English Sign Language of various kinds. These are scientists who think that humans are the most intelligent species, but they want the other animals to learn our language. So hang on, if you're the most intelligent species, you learn their ways of communicating. Try that for a start. So and there are people trying that on out. But there's a wonderful short bit in the Anna Singh and Company's book, Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet, where somebody says, our consciousness, sorry, these are not the exact words, our human consciousness is like a disruption. It's like the kind of popular media that keeps throwing crazy stuff at us, because we think that we are, that there's this phrase about humans are the cosmos become aware of itself. You go, we're not even aware of what the bacteria in our guts are thinking or feeling or wanting or desiring or doing. I mean, until I mentioned the elbow bacteria, you probably didn't know that they were there. And now you're going to caress your elbows all the time. I promise you will. Right. Because they're there, and so, and he says something like, at best we're like the janitor living in the basement of a building, and there's all these people living upstairs doing all these amazing strange things, and occasionally we hear funny noises, and occasionally we know that somebody's not very well, but most of the time we haven't got a clue what they're up to, what they like, and so on. And that's our consciousness is just getting in the way of us. So how do we do that? And I don't know that it's that easy with bacteria, but indigenous people in many places, I'm not trying to idealise indigeneity here, but especially because of genocidal disruptions and so on and so on. But not only that, because they're just ordinary people, but many of them have been experimenting with different ways of trying to engage with this large inhuman world, and therefore have ways of trying to encourage us. So that's partly why this pretty picture is here, not just because it's a nice backdrop to look at while I finish off, but also because this is the field that the salmon are in, trying to get up that river, but also because this is the field that Neil Zaslak, a Sami poet who really was central to the, how do I say this? Not exactly the reclamation of yoik traditions. So a yoik is put briefly, because we want to eat, is a song that one sings to another being to give respect. It's a song or a chant that one expresses who that other being is, whether it's the field or the mountain, the salmon, the reindeer, the human, the elder, whoever. And it's gifted to that other person, whatever species they are. And it becomes their intellectual property at that point. It's no longer the poet's song, it is the other being, other person's property. So yoiking is one of those ways in which, in this case, Sami, despite the disruptions of Sami cultures, plural, multiple, bits of that kind of carried on and have become much more important in recent decades, and especially with people like Neil Zaslak. Sorry, that's not his full name, and I can never quite get it all right, I'm sorry. So there are these great examples, and maybe that those of you who study other religions than the ones I'm interested in could equally well now come back and say, well, of course, there are these other practices that Jews, Muslims, Baha'is, you name it, they also have ways of engaging with the larger than human world, and we could experiment with those as well. So that's great, as our methodologies. So religion, as Jonathan Z. Smith said, is our word. It can be defined more than 57 ways, but it's our word to define, and therefore we can say these people have this thing called religion, even if they don't use that word themselves. We recognise something in there. So some of these things might be interesting ways for us methodologically to experiment with. How do we get into this multi-species communication? That was going to be the last question, but I see you're by the microphone, and Laurie can tell us whether it's we've got to stop on. No, you'll.
We should bring this up soon.
Go on, I'll try and be brief if you can.
I just want to make a quick comment.
Thanks.
In terms of definitions, where the rubber hits the road for me is in the exercise of counting religions, and that's the enterprise my team is a part of. And so your talk helpfully reminds me that there's a lot of meaning making and ritual outside of the institutionalized religions that we know so well.
Yeah.
And as we turn to study East Asia in our survey work, as Linda alluded at Pew, there's a lot of diffuse, informal, traditional religion, and we're seeking language for how to talk about the different kinds of meaning making and ritual and traditional religions. And so we're trying to kind of workshop that language and welcome anyone's suggestions for how, in the realm of what could be called non-religion, we can describe the spectrum of things that seem pretty religious, like what you've described, Graham, to things that are entirely secular. What are the best typologies for that? And so I just would welcome anyone's suggestions, because that's going to be really important to the work that our team does at Pew in the coming years.
Right, thanks. And yeah, and exactly those kind of strategies for thinking differently around our categories. So I do want to end then with that just insistence that although in this talk I've talked about animism, and once I think I said animisms plural, and I've talked about indigenous peoples, and I've thrown examples around from West Africa, from the Pacific, from North America. I think I mentioned Amazonia maybe. These are not one thing. So, and that is part of the danger of this new project of trying to get more attention for the larger array of things that we might call religion. That excuse me, as that project continues, then we can engage much more with the diversity of those things and be much more careful than I have been today about not all First Nation Canadian peoples do the same thing. But there are kind of exciting things, and if we limit ourselves to the stuff that most of our colleagues in the study of religions do, we're losing out lots of interesting stuff in religion, non-religion, politics, and so on. So thank you very much for listening and for your great questions. More stuff for me to think about. Thank you. Wish you much.
Thanks, Graham, very much. I would remind you there
At the back of the room, and also there's the possibility to stay on and have informal conversation with Graham, and that's kind of that's partly why we like to sort of do the formal question and answer, but then also the opportunity to engage. And I do want to thank Conrad, because his question or comment was exactly the concluding comment I wanted to make about what I think your talk has done for us today. So we're really grateful to you for taking us into some new territory, perhaps, and helping us to further complexify, as though perhaps we needed that, the whole exercise that we've been engaged with today, and especially drawing on Indigenous, thinking about indigeneity and Indigenous worldviews, if I can use that word, going back to the question that Dia asked earlier in the day. So thank you again, Graham, and thank you everyone for being here today and for the engaging conversation. And of course, the Non-Religion Project will come back here tomorrow. I would also remind the co-investigators that we'll have a meeting in about 5 minutes, just for a short time, and then we can come back and join in the reception as well. So thank you again, Graham, very much.